Welcome to the Federal Retirement Podcast. My name is David Rates from Benchmark Financial Group, and every month we discuss important topics regarding the retirement planning process for federal employees. This Lunch and Learn series is an interactive discussion where individuals can ask questions. To join these discussions live, you may register by joining our email list at bfgkc.com. We also provide in-person retirement planning and benefit education to federal employees. To learn more about these seminars or to schedule a seminar at your federal agency, go to our website at bfgkc.com and click on seminars. Additionally, if you're looking for assistance to get your retirement on the right track, set up an appointment with us today. You can schedule an appointment online by visiting our website at bfgkc.com or email me at david.rates@bfgkc.com. The contact information is also listed in the description. By setting up a complimentary consultation, we can review your financial situation and develop a plan to meet your financial goals. We hope you enjoyed this topic and hope to connect with you soon.
Well, thanks for tuning into this month's call, everyone. Seems like it's that time of the year again where we've had a number of clients getting their ducks in a row for end of the year retirement. So we thought it'd be a worthwhile topic to touch on what to do now to get ready. Feel free to chime in with any questions that come to mind. We'll get going. All righty. So usually numero uno on the list is definitely taking a look at your service records. So verifying service computation date is always an important piece of the pie. It's definitely important to remember the difference between your service computation date for leave and your service computation date for retirement. SCD for leave is a date that takes into account any hypothetical period of time that would be creditable towards retirement. The difference between that and SCD for retirement is what they have on the books for credit towards your pension calculations. So sometimes there can be a discrepancy between the two, and if you know that, that's okay. But you definitely don't want to go into the home stretch of retirement and figure out at that point in time that there's a discrepancy between the two. So double checking that one, documenting any breaks in service, any buyback time. Military time is usually a big one. You just verifying that they've accounted for that in your service computation date, and then keeping track of the deposit receipt is an important one too. So second item on the list is if you can track down any sort of pension estimates, those are always useful tools. So any retirement calculators from HR are always helpful. If for whatever reason HR takes forever and a day to get any information out to you, you can always default to the FERS annual benefit statement, the employee benefit statement. That gets updated every year in January, and it doesn't have as much as an HR retirement estimate, but it has a lot of pertinent identifying information that can take you pretty far in the event that you're having trouble getting those formal estimates back. And then there's a few different variations of the retirement estimates, but one of the more detailed ones is called an FRB report. And then one of the newer ones on the list would be the GRB platform, which is a nice tool where you can run estimates in real time on your end of things. So moving on to pension estimate. This would be a snapshot in HR retirement estimate, and important items on the list to keep an eye out for, like we said a second ago, just checking, make sure the high three average that they used is accurate. Like it's one thing if you're planning to retire in the very near future, but if they're making a forward projection on a retirement date, you always want to take that into consideration with that estimate. Oftentimes they'll ask you what time of year you want to have it run. So if you're kicking around retiring in different time frames, end of the year is usually a popular one, but sometimes people want to take a look at mid-year retirements too, and then verifying survivor benefits, maximum, partial, because those will be illustrated in those estimates as well. This will be a snapshot of just what that employee benefit statement looks like. And like we said, or like I said earlier, it's a useful tool in tracking down some identifying information about your retirement benefits. Gets updated once a year in January, and it's definitely useful, especially if there's delays in HR getting any information back to you. So this would just be a snapshot of an FRB report. So FRB is just one of the versions of a formal retirement report that you can get back from HR. Sometimes your agency might not necessarily have access to it, but if they do, it's always an important, it's always a valuable estimate to get your hands on because it does a more detailed breakdown of your service history. So, and then this would be a snapshot of HR estimate or retirement estimate from the GRP platform. It's an online tool in your personnel file, and it allows you to run real-time estimates, which just cuts down the lag time of having to filter those requests through HR. So if you have the option to use a GRB platform, and like we said, it's a useful tool as well. Moving on to item number 3 on the list would be taking into consideration, if you're in a spot where you're going to be looking at getting a FERS supplemental benefit, just jogging your memory about what that FERS supplement is. So the FERS special retirement supplement, in a nutshell, it's essentially a Social Security bridge payment. When you've got enough years of service in to retire prior to 62. So if you're in the boat where you can retire minimum retirement age with 30 years of service, or age 60 with 20 or more years of service, then you'd be eligible for that FERS retirement supplement, which, like you said, is kind of like you have the years in to retire from the government, but you're not eligible for Social Security yet. So it's this extra payment that Uncle Sam pays you that kind of mirrors Social Security until you're eligible to turn on Social Security at 62. And the calculation formula for the supplement is years of FERS service divided by 40 times your age 62 Social Security benefit. So net effect there is the more years of FERS service that you have, let's say you had 30, 35 years of FERS service, the closer your FERS supplemental payment is going to be to your age 62 Social Security. But if you have things like military time, that would be a variable that's not calculated in that supplemental payment. So just double checking that one so there aren't any surprises there. Taking a look at Social Security, because if you're in the boat where you're going to be getting that supplemental payment, you'll be getting that from retirement until age 62. At age 62, the supplemental payment automatically stops because you're eligible to turn on Social Security. So early retirees, you want to take that into consideration that you're not eligible to turn on Social Security until age 62. It's always important to take a look at what the supplemental payment is going to pay you relative to age 62 Social Security, because the supplemental payment just takes into account your FERS service, whereas Social Security takes into account your entire working history, and those are indexed for inflation. So it's not uncommon for folks to see usually like anywhere between a $500 to $1,000 a month pay bump, but just an automatic pay increase between the supplemental payment turning off at 62, and you turning on Social Security at 62. So some important questions to ask when you're thinking about Social Security. Will turning on Social Security get me more monthly income, or get you to an amount that you want to live on? It's important to take into consideration that you have more leverage over like TSP, IRA, 401k type of money, because there's a cash balance tied to it. Social Security is a monthly benefit that's payable while you're alive and well. So usually another question on the list is, does it make sense to delay Social Security until full retirement age or age 70, or does it make the most sense to turn it on as soon as possible? And do I want to live in another very important question that you have to ask yourself is, do I want to live on less monthly income now, or burn through more TSP, 401k, IRA money to get a higher payment from Social Security at full retirement age or age 70? We tend to gravitate towards turning it on sooner as opposed to later, because one variable that you have to keep in mind is that, all right, so circling back, this is a snapshot of just a Social Security estimate. Big bold number on the front of the page. That's the one that your eye is usually gravitating towards when you're looking at it. And it's important to keep in mind that that's the payment that's payable at your full retirement age. So usually you got to flip to the second page to get an idea of what the payment is going to be at age 62 versus full retirement age at age 67 in this situation, or age 70. So just remember, flipping to the back of the page to get all the different benefits at all the different age ranges. Full retirement age, or FRA, with Social Security, it's a byproduct of when you were born. So for a long time, it was 65. Now we're starting to see a lot of folks stretch into 66 in a few months and 67. But just remembering that full retirement age is a variable based off of when you were born. And once you get to full retirement age, you don't need to worry about an earnings test anymore. But that's something we'll touch on here in a second. And then this is just a snapshot of the ladder of Social Security payments. And like we said a second ago, it's easy to think like that you're going to get the highest payment amount at age 70, but you also have to take into consideration the reason you're getting a higher payment amount at age 70 is because you would have hypothetically deferred 8 years of monthly payments at that 1,700 level. So always an important thing to take into consideration when you're planning to turn on Social Security relative to all the other moving parts. Number 5 on the list is review your TSP plan, investment options, withdrawal options, estimate. You would want to take a look at a withdrawal strategy, or oftentimes it's an exercise in pinning a withdrawal amount from TSP to a specific number so that you can get to an amount of net monthly income that you're comfortable living on. It's one thing to live on like the pension and the FERS supplement, but if you're just living on those 2 income streams, and that puts you in a spot where you're down a noticeable amount on a net monthly basis, you got to take into consideration whether or not you want to be in that boat, or potentially if you're strategic about what you're doing, spinning off a specific amount of income from TSP, but doing it in a way where you don't have to worry about running out of money in your mid 80s and making sure that that money lasts through the long haul of retirement. Consider larger withdrawals early, or seems like lately we've had a few clients that have taken the Vera retirement offers. And let's say you're in a boat where you could now retire at 53 or 54, and you're not eligible to turn on your FERS supplement until 57. For instance, we've had a few clients that have we've worked with them on putting together an income strategy where they have a higher amount of money spinning off of TSP savings to get past that hump of 57 or 60, knowing that different benefits are going to kick in at different time intervals. So that's part of the, I guess, magic in figuring out an income strategy that makes the most sense for your individual situation. So, and then getting a handle on TSP withdrawal options is always important. So just a refresher on TSP withdrawal options: lump sum or partial payment, full or partial rollover to traditional Roth IRA, monthly payments, a specific dollar amount, and fixed annuity or payments over lifetime. And also important to remember that if you're in a boat where you're retired at age 55 with 30 years of service, or if you're a special category employee like the air traffic controller, law enforcement officer, if you're in that boat, the public safety employees, you can retire at age 50 and tap into TSP for monthly income and not have to worry about paying an early withdrawal penalty. Normal FERS 55, you can tap into TSP for monthly income and not have to worry about paying an extra 10% early withdrawal penalty. The early withdrawal penalty is it's tied to the age 59 and a half. For whatever reason, age 59 and a half is kind of like this magic age that applies to pretty much every retirement savings account that's out there. Oftentimes it's an exercise in planning around or figuring out how you can use TSP money relative to when you're retiring so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot with federal taxes, state taxes, and then an additional 10% early withdrawal penalty. And there are ways to do it. It's just you have to be strategic about what you're doing and make an informed decision. So just a refresher on TSP funds: G fund, F fund are traditionally considered the safe funds. G would probably be the safest: short-term U.S. government treasury securities. Principal and interest is guaranteed by the U.S. government, so that's traditionally considered risk-free. It's usually not going to blow the socks off of growth to the plus side, but it's also not going to lose money when periods of volatility. F fund, that is a bond fund. Tracks the Bloomberg U.S. Aggregate Bond Index. It's a mix of U.S. government, mortgage-backed, and corporate bond, investment-grade corporate bonds. And F fund, its gains and losses are directly tied to which direction we're going in interest rates. So just keep in the back of your mind, keep an eye on interest rates if you got a large proportion of money in F fund. C fund and S fund would be 2 of the stock or equity funds. C fund is essentially a S&P 500 index fund. It's a market index made up of 500 U.S. large cap stocks. Over the long haul, S&P 500 or C funds. C funds been around since 1988. Average annual since inception has been about 10-11%. It doesn't do that every year. It doesn't grow at a 45-degree angle, but it's produced some pretty solid growth over the long haul. S fund is a small cap, specifically a small cap fund. It's specifically invested in small and medium U.S. companies that are not listed in the S&P 500. And then I funds internationals, so tracks MSCI, China, Hong Kong index or East Asia index. And it's broad international index made up of large, medium, and small companies. So invested in more than 40 developed and emerging market countries. And geopolitical risk is always one to take into consideration if you're investing in I. L funds are kind of an auto default option, but Sometimes if you don't necessarily want to dig into the weeds that deeply, L funds aren't a bad option for folks. It's kind of like the set and forget it option, but it's a diversified mix of GFCS and I. The year and the name of the L fund is the target date that you're shooting for. So in a nutshell, L2070 would be considered the riskiest life cycle fund, and then L2025 or L income would be considered the safest or the life cycle fund with the least variability. Let's just put it that way in the marketplace. Alrighty. So when you're thinking about TSP, it's always important to take into consideration an investment and income strategy. And oftentimes that centers around pinpointing specific chunks of money that you might have paid out for like short-term income, a specific amount of money that you have paid out for medium and long-term, and then a specific chunk that's earmarked for long-term income. Oftentimes people will take one TSP and split it up into 2 or 3 buckets that are earmarked to do different things at different times. So this would just be a snapshot of a total strategy of short, medium, and long term. But in this scenario, this would be a snapshot of somebody that was retiring at 56 and wanted to keep a chunk of money in TSP so that they could use that for monthly income and not have to worry about paying the 10% early withdrawal penalty. So from 56 to 60, they were using TSP to distribute monthly income. Once we got past 59 and a half, didn't need to worry about the early withdrawal penalty. So it made sense to look outside for an outside IRA. This would be a snapshot of mid to long term duration of that income strategy. So green box would represent a liquid growth bucket or house car medical vacation fund. We usually like to subdivide that one out so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. When you have all your eggs in one basket and you're using that for monthly income and you take an extra chunk out, depending on the size of that chunk and the timing when you do it, oftentimes you would need to account or adjust your monthly income to account for that chunk. So that's one of the main reasons why we like to subdivide that bucket out. And then that blue box would represent long-term income earmarked to pay out after 65. Tips to consider. Definitely having an adequate amount of liquid or emergency opportunity money, or the bucket that's earmarked for those big 4 house, car, medical vacays. Definitely you want to try your best not to make emotional decisions, because that oftentimes leads you down a road of being very frustrated. Rebalance your asset allocations as needed. Usually quarterly is an important duration of time to pinpoint for that one. And then definitely evaluate all the retirement income sources. So you want to make these decisions like about TSP withdrawals or things like that when you're taking into consideration all the pieces of the pie. So looking at pension income, looking at FERS supplemental income, looking at Social Security income relative to the amount that you have spending off of TSP is definitely the most prudent way to go about doing it. Moving on to FERS pension. Important questions to take into consideration. So there's going to be a pension amount, but if you have a spouse, one of the questions that you got to take that you have to answer is, which survivor option do you want to go with? You pretty much have 3 options with FERS pension: life only, the partial survivor, which would be a quarter of your pension, and then a maximum survivor benefit. And Uncle Sam's lingo, maximum equals 50% of your FERS pension. It's always important to refresh yourself on the order of eligibility for survivor benefits on that FERS pension. So, well, I would say with this round of VERA offers, we've had a few clients that are in the boat where they've got to pay a portion of. So if you got to account for like 20 or 30% of your FERS pension going to a former spouse, you definitely want to know how much that's going to be and the logistics of how it's paid out, so that you can plan for that in your overall budget and your income going forward as a retiree. So the order of eligibility for FERS survivor benefits would be former spouse with a court order or COAP, current spouse. Insurable interest is pretty darn rare. Minor children are pretty rare. In theory, you'd have to take a large reduction in your pension to leave it to an insurable interest. So it's almost hardly ever seen. But so you kind of bank on former spouse and current spouse are the 2 options there. Just a refresher on the survivor benefit options. So the maximum FERS survivor benefit is 50% of your FERS pension. So to leave that option, you got to pay 10% out of your FERS pension. It's not like they they set it up so it's automatically taken out of the back end of your pension. So in that sense, it's pretty easy, but it's kind of like the chunk that you pay in order to leave that benefit for your surviving spouse. So the maximum is 10% of your pension. Partial surviving spouse benefit is a quarter of your FERS pension. So in order to leave a quarter of your FERS pension to a survivor, you got to reduce it by 5% while you're a retiree. So, and important to keep in the back of your mind too, that the federal employee health benefits and the survivor benefits are kind of directly intertwined. In order to leave FEHB for a spouse, you got to go with 50 or 25% option. It's a big deal because Uncle Sam continues to subsidize about a little over 70% of that premium through both of your lives, even if your spouse is a survivor. So sometimes it's a question of is the maximum the option that makes the most sense, or sometimes it works where they go with the partial, the 25% option, because they're just looking to leave that health benefit, and 25 is enough to cover the cost of the health premium most of the time. So always want to analyze those survivor benefits and build that into your plan. What happens to FEHB, dental, and vision? FEHB is transferred to OPM after retirement. So while you're on interim pay, there's no FEHB premiums taken out of your paycheck, but FEHB premiums are retroactively deducted once OPM finalizes and dots all the I's and crosses all the T's on your final pension amount. And then dental and vision, you communicate directly with benefits after retirement. So go directly to benefits website or give them a call to coordinate paying for dental and vision as a retiree. This is just a refresher on you definitely want to make sure that your beneficiary forms are up to date and set the way that you want them to be set. So just a refresher on the important ones: SF 1152, that would be unpaid compensation of a deceased employee or final paycheck and annual leave. SF 2823, that would be federal employee group life insurance beneficiary designation. That one's important. SF 2808, that would be CERS designation of beneficiary, or who would be the beneficiary if you passed away and there were like, for instance, let's say you and your spouse passed away and there wasn't a surviving spouse for the pension income anymore, then there will be a return of the money that you paid in for the CSRS pension benefit or FERS pension benefit. There's a rolling total of money that like for most FERS employees, they pay 0.8% per paycheck into the FERS pension coffers. So like I said, if in certain situations, God forbid, if you pass away as an active employee, there would be a return of those pension contributions to a survivor. And then TSP designation of beneficiaries is done through their website now. So it's just a snapshot of what the SF 1152 looks like, or the beneficiary for paycheck and leave. Snapshot of SF 2823, the FEHB form. This one's kind of a tricky form. So if you got any questions on it, feel free to reach out. But sometimes the wording of it can be a little bit confusing. Snapshot of CSRS designation of beneficiary form. Snapshot of 3102, SF 3102, that will be the FERS retirement system contributions, and then TSP. So what happens once you retire? NFC notification of separation, that letter usually comes about 45 days after retirement. That's when you know that your agency has essentially moved you from active employee with your agency to OPM retiree. Your first two payments that you get in retirement come from your agency. That would be final paycheck and annual leave. And then all your records are shifted to OPM, and that's when you deal with OPM for everything going forward. Eventually, when you're an OPM retiree, they'll send you a welcome packet that has a civil service annuitant number, or a CSA number. That's essentially your identification number as an OPM retiree. So you always want to keep that one in your records. Usually about a week or two after that welcome packet arrives, you'll get a temporary password to log into the Services Online website with OPM. Services Online is kind of like the main resource of information to figure out where things are at in process. So you always want to keep an eye out for that temporary password. And then upon receipt of CSA number, it just depends on the timing of your retirement relative to how old you are with TSP options. Usually 59 and a half or retirement are the times that you can move TSP money. So if you're in a boat where you're retiring prior to 59 and a half, then it's oftentimes a variable where you got to wait a few weeks after formal retirement, before you're on the books as a retiree with Thrift Savings Plan. So this is just a snapshot of what the CSA number looks like. And interim payments, keep that one in the back of your mind too. Because when you're an OPM retiree and they're crunching the numbers, you're going to be in interim pay status. And that's essentially the period of time where they're auditing your service history and crunching the final numbers for your final official pension payment. So interim payment is kind of a little bit of a crapshoot, usually 68 to 80% of your full FERS pension annuity, and it doesn't include the FERS supplement. And first full pension payment usually takes about 3 months. So I would plan on the longer end of the spectrum, especially with your retirements and a lot of folks going out at the end of September this year. But all of it usually depends on how complex your service history is. The more colorful your service history is, usually the longer it takes them to crunch those numbers. And then this is just a refresher. While you're on interim pay, OPM is essentially verifying all of your records. So you're not losing any of the money that they're supposed to be paying you. It's just they're going to retroactively pay you the chunks of money that you were owed, but they're also going to retroactively deduct any FEHB, FEGLI, and other appropriate deductions. So you're not going to lose any money while you're in interim pay. It's just the net will be whatever's left over after FEHB and FEGLI premiums. Once you get to the point of having everything finalized, eventually they'll send you it's a little book with a blue cover, and it says it has my federal retirement benefits on the front. You always want to keep this one in a safe spot because it just breaks down what your decisions are and final payments amount for each piece of the pie. So it's summary of all of your retirement benefits once they finally crunch those numbers. So finalize FERS pension payment amounts. They'll give you a breakdown of what your FERS survivor options are, what options you chose for federal employee group life insurance, the FERS supplement amount. So it's an important one to keep in your records, because sometimes people forget what those options are a few years down the road after retirement. So keep that one in a safe place. So how do you get the process started? With us, it's usually a multi-step process. First meeting is always what we call the fact-finding meeting, where we send you a list of information to gather. And the more accurate that information is, the more accurate we can be with the numbers that we crunch for you. But after we get the information sharing meeting, that fact-finding meeting out of the way, we crunch the numbers and give you a detailed breakdown of just options for each piece of the pie. So what it would look like for different survivor options on your first pension, give you some ideas on what you might want to do with FEGLI insurance if you're carrying that as a retiree, giving it a breakdown of supplemental payment amount for a supplement, and then a TSP income strategy. It's always an important piece of the pie. One of the most important ones that we put together for folks, though, is it's called a net monthly income comparison, where we take a look at your net monthly income as an active employee relative to net monthly income as a retiree. So, and then in subsequent meetings, it's a process of finalizing what options you want to go with. And if it makes sense to move some money outside of TSP, there's a process that takes place of pinpointing what you want to do, when you want to do it, and then opening up accounts, funding those accounts, and getting TSP rollovers going. And then it's an ongoing review from there. So even after the point of retirement, the relationship doesn't stop. So oftentimes the plans need to be adjusted from one year to the next. So it's, like we said, an ongoing process. What items do you need for the first meeting? Tracking down a copy of a recent pay stub or a recent leave and earnings statement is always helpful, because we use that for that net monthly income comparison. Copy of any retirement estimate you can get your hands on, or that annual FERS benefit statement is always helpful. Also just a recent TSP statement. Any statements on investment accounts or accounts that were kind of earmarked for retirement income, detail on any life insurance policies, long-term care policies that you have in force. And that's just a recent Social Security statement, divorce degree. And then sometimes people get to the point of wanting to incorporate spouses benefits into the mix too. So if that's a piece of the pie. How about any questions, Patty?
There aren't any questions. David, do you have anything else?
Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you have any questions that we didn't touch on and you want to reach out, you can always give me a call, shoot me an email, or submit your questions via the website. Thanks for tuning in, and hope to talk to you guys soon.